Greetings, IB artists. This is Miss A. I apologize for having fallen off the planet again, but I am back today with some insights from my marking of the last batch of IB Art exams. A lot of these points I've made before, but they are still continuing to show up regularly in exams. So I thought I would cover those again, and maybe there's a few that you haven't heard as well. I'm kind of getting into the habit of doing that every single year. So whenever I mark the exams, I also make notes at the time of anything that I feel is important for you guys out there to know, so that you avoid making the same mistakes. Can you believe it's the end of another summer? Oh my goodness. Anyway, so the very, very first one, and I have made this point many times before, and I cannot stress this enough, and it is beware of using found objects. I hope I've said that clearly enough. I'm going to write it out as well. But again, beware of using found objects in your art. I cannot stress this enough, because if you are not using them in a very intentional way, in a way that is very sophisticated, if there's no other or better way for you to create an artwork other than with including a found object, then go ahead and do it. If you do go ahead and do it, make sure that you don't do it in several of your pieces. This is my personal opinion. Of course, the IB curriculum allows you to use found objects in your artwork. I, however, strongly recommend that you do not, and that if you do, you use it with severe caution. And I'm not really exaggerating here. Think about it. You have a finite number of pieces, whether you're HL or SL. And then if you're using stuff that you have found on top of that, and you are not using it well, so whether it's because you don't have the skills to make that, or I don't know. I mean, usually students use it because it's a shortcut of some sort, and that's a bad thing. It doesn't enhance your work. It doesn't support it, okay? It highlights the fact that you haven't been able to create something yourself. So again, unless you are really sure about what you're doing, you've obviously discussed it with your teacher and they think it's a good idea, then go ahead and use it. But if you haven't gone through this tick list, I would strongly advise against it. There, end of lecture, it's up to you. I think an important thing to understand is what derivative work is. Derivative work in this context of IB art, you are creating an artwork that is influenced by the artist that you're studying. What's wrong with that, you say? That's absolutely fine. In fact, that is what you should be doing. You should be studying artists, and you should be creating artwork that has been influenced by what you have learned about these artists, their work, the materials they use, how they engage with the discourse of art, their background, how they express their ideas, and all that wonderful stuff. However, derivative work is work that references that artist, but in an extremely superficial way. Basically, it's one step away from copying them, right? This is not good. That means that you haven't really learned much. Copying someone, especially in this context in any context, that's why there's copyright laws, etc. But in this specific context, it just shows that your learning isn't on the level that the IB requires it to be. You are kind of skimming the surface, and by skimming the surface, you're applying that very superficial knowledge to your own work which makes it very superficially influenced by that artist, and in other words, it's almost a copy of that artist's work. Not what you want to see in an IB art exam, and not what you want to do if you want to score, a decent grade. So that's something to watch out for. It's very important that you discuss with your teacher and reflect yourself on whether your work is derivative or not, right? So I hope I've made that distinction clear. It is important to be influenced by artists that you're learning from, but it is also important that you are not using what you have learned in a very superficial way and almost copying their work, because that is not the same as learning about something and then creatively making it your own by adding your own intentions and ways to express those intentions. So when you are referencing artists, so for example, if you're saying, well, I used, let's say, Picasso's Cubism in this piece, but you don't really explain why that was a decision that you've made, that again sounds very superficial. Was it a whim? Did you just like the way it looked, etc., etc.? You get my point. It could be anything. It could be impressionism, or it could be, minimalism, or whatever it is that you're looking at. But if you're not really explaining your choices, then how can I gauge what and whether you're learning from what you're doing at all? Was it an intentional choice to use Picasso's Cubism? Walk me through it. Be specific. Tell me your thought process behind your artwork. That's very, very important to include. In fact, that is what your curatorial rationale is. Explaining to me why you have made the decisions that you have. And again, if you are omitting that part where you explain to me why you are using, let's say, Picasso's Cubism, I'm going to assume that it's a very superficial decision that you've made, and therefore your work is very derivative, because that step of learning and exploring and experimenting and developing, taking things further that you have learned, has basically been opted out. So you've just gone from, oh, I like the look of that, to I'm going to create something in the style of Cubism for no good reason. That leads to derivative work. Right? Avoid using etc. in your curatorial rationale. Your curatorial rationale is not very long. So in your curatorial rationale, you have to be super clear what it is that you are doing, that you're explaining exactly what your intentions are, the process of your work, influences, your learning, and all that good stuff that's going to be scoring you points for all the criteria that you're being judged on. If you put something like etc. ... don't assume that the examiner knows what you mean, right? Be very specific and direct. And also, the examiner cannot assume what you mean. So it's a lack of clarity. Etc. is okay if it's something where, there's a list and there's a very obvious kind of continuation to that list that you've provided. But just to be on the safe side, say what you mean and be very, very clear and precise. It just eliminates any kind of confusion. This one is a pet peeve, and I've pointed this one out, several times, but really the quality of the photos of your work is extremely important. I feel like the last few years, because of the COVID-19 virus, etc., a lot of students have to take their own photos, maybe at home, without as much supervision, and I feel that the quality of the photos has actually become even worse. Guys, please make sure that that is not true for you. This is the only thing that the examiner sees and relies on fully to mark your exam. Make sure that you put in the effort to photograph your work well, try as much as possible to avoid including people, whether it's yourself or other people. It's just a distraction. The exhibition photo, whether it's one or two that you provide, make sure that those are really super strong, clean, without distractions as much as possible. So they're very, very important. The other individual photographs of your individual pieces are also obviously extremely important. Make sure that when you enlarge the photographs that it's not just this pixelated blur. Make sure that you take high resolution photographs. If you have issues with it, if the photo doesn't look good, get help. Get someone else to take the photographs for you. There's so many videos online. There's so many people who are, amateur photographers. Just ask for help and make the effort. It really is worth your while. Again, I talked about derivative work. Also, please stop copying images off Google. If you found an image of Tumblr or wherever you find these photos, the chances are that they are on the internet and they're easily found. So don't copy images. It is something that you are asked not to do by the IB organization, and it's just wrong. You are copying somebody else's work and you are then submitting that for your exam. So it's just not a good idea at all. Some students misinterpret what coherence. In criterion A, you are judged on the coherence of your work. Coherence of work does not mean that you are repetitive, that, for example, you repeat an idea over and over again, or that you repeat some kind of motif again and again, that you repeat anything again and again. If you are not pushing yourself out of your comfort zone with each piece that you are creating, so if you're not exploring something new, or you're not taking something further, developing it in new ways, or looking at it from a new angle, or something where you are pushing your work a little bit further in every piece, then the chances of your work being repetitive are actually very high. So be conscious of what you are doing while you are in the process of creating that piece. It's probably a good idea to really sit down and think about, what do I want to take further before you start developing each piece, because that way you know where you have to push yourself and you're clear on the fact that you are developing your work, that you are pushing harder with each piece, that you are progressing, and of course ultimately learning with each piece. If you kind of reach a plateau and you're kind of doing very similar work over and over again with the same level of challenge throughout the work, then it's very likely that your work is repetitive. You're not bringing anything new, you're not discovering anything new, you're not exploring or experimenting with anything new, and that just means that you have kind of reached a plateau, which is not what the IB wants you to do. So another thing that I've noticed is, be careful when you use specific art terms, for example like art movements. If you are referencing abstract expressionism, then make sure that you know what abstract expressionism is. Don't guess, oh, this kind of looks like abstract expressionism, because it's about learning, and it's about learning a subject. So within this context of learning about art, abstract expressionism has a very specific meaning. And if it isn't what you mean, if you're just kind of looking at something and labeling it as abstract expressionism, that shows lack of knowledge. So avoid this. If you are using specific art movement references, then make sure that you really know what those movements are about, not just visually, but also thematically, their context, development, what ideas, intentions, all that good stuff. Because again, that is part of your learning the subject. With the curatorial rationale and with all your writing really, but let's just stick to the curatorial rationale. The curatorial rationale is not very long. You are really condensing a lot of information into that short piece of writing. Don't overcomplicate this. You know, there is no place for things like quotes. Don't try and sound smarter than you are. Just focus on clarity. Get people who know nothing about your work to read it and see if it makes sense to them. Ask them, do you understand what I'm trying to say? And of course there will be some things that are very specific to art, but they should, generally speaking, understand what it is that you're trying to say. And if they don't, then you need to go back and, you know, edit and rewrite some parts. So the more people see your curatorial rationale and read it and understand it, the better your curatorial rationale is likely to be. I'm not saying oversimplify things or dumb things down. I'm not saying that. Whether it's a very complex concept that you are trying to express, which basically you should be at this level, make sure that you express it in a way that is understandable, clear, and not overcomplicated. Complex ideas should be explained in a very clear and simple way. Don't overcomplicate and don't try and make it really sound, I don't know, cleverer than it is. Okay? I hope that's actually clear. If you're still confused, let me know in the comments below. Okay? Another thing to avoid is sweeping statements or statements assuming that the examiner knows what you mean. I will give you an example. So let's say you take some kind of flower. Foxgloves represent vulnerability. Where does that reference come from? Why do you think that? Just like the international body of students that the IBO reaches, you're also dealing with examiners from all over the world who may not know what that reference is. So again, make sure that you clarify what you mean exactly, and if you're using things like metaphors or similes or whatever, try and clarify them by referencing where you got that from. So for example, another sweeping statement would be something like, you know, through the lens of femininity. Now that's a really, it's a very kind of open-ended idea. What do you mean through the lens of femininity? You know, so obviously, you know, I'm probably thinking of very traditional femininity, how it's been portrayed, how it's been, the roles of femininity have been played, etc., etc. But what is it that you mean, right? So again, when you make a statement and it's very, very broad like that, so something representing something or something, like words that are very, especially nowadays, very open to debate, state what you mean more clearly. Avoid open-ended assumptions that you or the examiner may have. In the curatorial rationale, you're obviously talking about your assumptions, or not assumptions, but your conclusions based on what you have learned, etc. So let me know what your intentions were specifically without being vague and open-ended, so that I have to kind of fill in the blanks, because I may not be able to in the way that you want me to. Hope that's clear. If it isn't, again, let me know in the comments below. I'm basically asking you not to assume that the examiner knows exactly what you mean unless you explain it. You should assume that if you're using very general terms, that the examiner needs to know what specifically about those terms is relevant to what your intention is. I hope that's better. Right, so going back to the photographs, you are allowed to submit 2 exhibition photographs. If possible, in both those photographs, so in the first one, have all your work in that first one, and then take another one and have all your work in the second one. Try not to split the work up in one photo and then the rest of the work in the second photo, only because personally, I will tell you personally, when I am allocating marks, I am usually looking at the exhibition photograph and looking at the whole body of work, which makes it easier for me to kind of allocate marks on the whole, right? Because you may have pieces that are stronger, you may have pieces that are weaker, and therefore if I'm kind of having to go back and forth, it really helps me if I have all the work in one photograph, because then I can just allocate the appropriate level for each criterion based on the whole photograph. Right, that's it for this year's batch of exams, and I hope that these insights that I've had and jotted down are useful to you. The holiday is unfortunately coming to an end, so I hope you've had a really good one. I hope you've spent a lot of it thinking about and working on your art portfolio, and that you're ready now for a whole new school year of pushing and developing and exploring and experimenting. So I wish you all the very best with all your work, and I hope you get to enjoy a really, really lovely year this year. All the very best. Let me know if there's anything you want me to address specifically in my videos, and thank you so much for supporting me by liking, sharing, commenting on my videos, and of course subscribing. I'm really, really, truly grateful. Thank you so much. Right, so I'm going to stop melting